Good evening, everybody. Welcome at Azure Thursday. Nice to have you all. I'm Luc, and together with Roland, I'm the host of this evening. Last month, we had a very successful edition and received a lot of positive feedback, but I think we have an amazing lineup for you again this month. Tonight, we have 3 sessions for you. We start with a session by Barbara Forbes about Azure Functions and PowerShell. Then we have a session by John Galloway about building cloud-native applications with project type. And we end with a session given by Kushik Aravali, and he's going to talk about building Azure DevOps extensions at the Cloud Center of Excellence. Between the sessions, we will have a short break, about 5 minutes. And now let's fast kick off with the first sessions and move to our first speaker. Barbara, welcome.
Hi.
Hello. How are you?
I'm good.
Yeah?
And you?
Not overheated yet?
No, the fan is helping.
That's good. That's good. Well, it's very good to have you. You're a Microsoft trainer, Azure MVP, working at SCCT as a consultant. Anything more to tell about you?
Well, yes, you kind of took away my intro.
Well, very good at.
No, that's pretty much, I work with Azure a lot and with a strong focus on automation. So PowerShell and Azure Function Apps is a great combination for me.
Yeah, really cool. Yeah. And you've been awarded the MVP since on Azure since March.
Yeah.
This was about the same time with the Corona.
Yeah.
How did you manage it the last months?
Well, the funny thing was I was on holiday when I got the email. I was in Scotland to speak at a conference, and then we went on a holiday there, and I got the email, and I think that was the last possible holiday that you could have in that period. So we were lucky with that holiday. And yeah, now getting used to doing everything online. And well, it is okay. I do like the online thing. I would hope we will get into a hybrid environment in the end where we'll do more online and also see each other in person.
Yeah, a nice combination would be good, I guess. Yeah. You also have a very cool blog about topics around Azure, automation, PowerShell, serverlets. Do you already have a sneak preview on what's coming next? Or?
The next blog post.
Yeah.
Let's say infrastructure as code, and I hope next Sunday. I hope I will make it, but the weather is really nice, so I'm not going to promise anything.
More time for the site and writing some blog.
It's going to be a new post on infrastructure as code.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Nice. Yeah. Well, let's start with your session.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so this session is called When Powers Combine Azure Function Apps and PowerShell. A combination which I truly believe in, and with this title I find some people get the reference, some people do not, and I really wanted the Captain Planet picture in here, but I couldn't find one that was loyalty free. So Go Planet, when powers combine, you get Azure Function Apps and PowerShell. Well, I don't have to introduce myself because that all just happened. I will say again, my blog is on Forbes.nl, and my Twitter handle is BA4BES, and that is also my GitHub handle. So let's get into it. This is a bit of a schedule for what we're going to go through. First, some basic intro on what is PowerShell, what are Azure Function Apps, and what do they mean to each other. After that, we're going to talk a bit about how you can deploy function apps. And in the end, I have a little showcase with a function app I wrote that can clean up my Azure resources. And it's a bit more complicated function app to see a more complicated use case. So first things first, one of the 2 factors is PowerShell. And people who have a Windows Server background are probably familiar with PowerShell because it's almost impossible to touch a Windows Server and have not worked with PowerShell yet. And the logo you see here is PowerShell 5, which is based on the .NET framework. And this is what we now call Windows PowerShell. This is PowerShell 5.1, which is one of the last versions that the last version that was released for the Windows PowerShell. Because now we have, this started out as PowerShell Core, but this is now PowerShell PowerShell. We're now on version 7, and PowerShell has become open source and multi-platform, and it's now based on .NET Core. Because it's open source, there's a lot of development going on. It's going really fast, and it's actually used a lot on Linux machines and on Mac machines as well. And there's so much going on that it gets so much more fun to work with it. So if you're still working with Windows PowerShell and you think about PowerShell Core, really give it a try. It is something you need to download separately. There is another version I need to mention, and this is PowerShell Preview, where you can play around with the preview features, maybe test something and give some feedback on it. And me personally, I really like that logo. So that logo is a deal breaker on its own for me. I really love that logo. The great thing is you can run them all in parallel. So you can have them all on your computer. If you have a problem with one of them, you can try another one. If you want to download PowerShell Core or PowerShell Preview, or you want to see the code, or you want to submit an issue, this is the GitHub repository for the PowerShell. These are all the PowerShell repos, so you can find everything and download it on your own computer. Now that's PowerShell. What are Azure Function Apps? Azure Function Apps are in the serverless compute family, and serverless means, for one, you can say that you're running serverless, which instantly makes you sound cool. But what it actually is that you can run your code on a backend that you do not have to manage. So you're running on someone else's server. You do not have to worry about the backend or scaling up or scaling down. Basically, you can copy and paste your code into the function app, and all the other stuff is taken care of. Now, one of the cool things that Azure Function Apps can do is they can be triggered by events or by requests, but there are a lot of triggers available which can start your script. And we will get into that a bit later on what kind of triggers are available at this point, but there are a lot of options out there. Which can really help with automatic logic. And in my opinion, it's very valuable for managing Azure, especially with PowerShell. PowerShell in Function App it became general available November 2019. And the development has been going on. And this can really up your Azure management game, because you can get access to all your Azure resources. You can get a pretty native connectivity. You can give it an identity so it can work with your subscription. And you can just call APIs if that works better, work with cognitive services, stuff like that. You have the option to run multiple functions in a functional app and let them run in parallel. So your functions will run a lot faster because they can do multiple things at one time. So that's pretty neat as well. And I didn't mention you can manage Azure. You can also manage your hybrid environment. So you are able to manage on-premises resources. Now, maybe there are people who have been working with PowerShell and working with Azure and are wondering, what about Azure automation accounts? Because that was always the place to go when you have PowerShell scripts, where you can store them and run them without having to worry about a server running behind it. So they do have some overlap. And I made a quick little graph here where you can see some things that are different between an automation account and a function app. One key thing is that an automation account by default runs on Azure RM, while a function app by default runs on the AZ module. And you can change that. You can install the AZ or AZ module on the automation account, but the problem is you cannot uninstall Azure RM. And mostly that goes fine, but it can get a bit buggy if you're running automation account. So you can install it, but with function apps, it's already the default feature. And an automation account is running PowerShell 5.1, like we just talked about, while function app was always running on PowerShell core PowerShell 6, and just recently PowerShell 7 has become an option to run in a function app. So you get the newer version to run your PowerShell scripts in. One thing that an automation account can do where the function app doesn't do so much is create long-lasting scripts. The default runtime for a function app, if you're running in a consumption plan, is 5 minutes, and you can stretch that to 10 minutes. But by then your function should be done or it will time out. And I think with an automation account, you get like 30 minutes or something like that. So if you have a report that takes a bit longer to run, then an automation account might work better for you. And there's one thing where an automation account, in my opinion, wins from a function app without a doubt, and that is for hybrid management, and specifically for Active Directory management. With an automation account, you would install a hybrid worker, and that hybrid worker is just a virtual machine on your on-premise network where you connect the agent to, and you can run scripts in your network, so you can also use it to manage Active Directory. With a function app, you can create a hybrid connection, but a hybrid connection is not able to be installed on a domain joined VM. So to manage Active Directory can be a bit of a hassle if you want to even start with it. So that's where an automation account might come in handier if you want one spot to manage Azure Active Directory and Active Directory itself, for example. If none of these apply to you and you're like, I don't care about all these things, which one should I choose? I would recommend a function app, because there's a bit more development going on and it's a bit more exciting with new technology. And it also helps you to get in an application mindset, especially if, like me, you have an IT pro background. A function app can get you in a developer mindset, which I think is a good thing at this point. And it's the newer version of PowerShell and the newer version of the AZ module. So that's automation accounts. Now let's consider what a function app is. And this is a really basic display of what a function does. And I must say, this is a function within a function app. And why that's important is because you can have multiple functions in one function app. So what happens with a function is it is triggered by something. Something triggers the function app. Next to the trigger, it can take input from somewhere. So for example, that trigger could be a web request, an HTTP request, and that input could be some data from a storage account or from a Cosmos database. Something like that. One of them is a trigger, and you can put input there as well. Then in the middle, the magic happens where your script is running, and this generates an output. The output is not necessary, it's often handy, but for example, if you use an HTTP request, it is a good thing to have an HTTP output as well. So this is in real basic word what a function does. Now, if we consider those triggers, here are the examples of what triggers you can use for an Azure function app with PowerShell. The HTTP trigger and the webhook and the timer trigger, they speak a lot for themselves. HTTP can be with invoke REST methods or through another service or just in a browser. A timer means you can set it to a schedule. You can have an event-based trigger where some events happen in an event hub, and you can store other events from other systems there as well and have the function act on that. You can connect it to a storage account for blob storage, table storage, and the message queue. And the message queues we'll get into later. But the storage account, you can think, well, once a file is entered into the storage account, the function app needs to do something. You can connect to a Cosmos database. So if a new entry is in the Cosmos database, then the function app starts running. You can connect it to Internet of Things. So a camera or a Raspberry Pi, something like that. Maybe there's a camera and it takes a picture and you want some action to be done with that picture right when it gets taken. Function app can do that for you. And you can use the service bus as well. So that gives a lot of options. And I think the first two are the ones you will get started with if this is the first time you're working with function apps. But they are a lot of fun to all see what all the things are about, what all these triggers are about, and how they can help you with automating, well, pretty much everything. Now there's triggers and there's bindings. And the bindings are the input and the output values. And I know this is a pretty small screen. So I'm going to use this link. And of course it opens on my other screen. There we go. This is just a Microsoft Docs documentation, and here I can get an overview, and this is a bit bigger than we just saw, with the input and the output bindings and what triggers you can use, but actually the input and the output is what we're thinking about now. As you can see, there are a lot of possibilities here, a lot of different options that you can use with that function app and create that connection. So you do not have to worry about having API keys or having it triggered on someplace else. This will all be taken care of for you. So that's a pretty nice overview and a lot of different options. Now, what does that look like? This is a lot of theory. What does an Azure Function app look like in real life? This is a function app that I created for a demo. And what this function app does is this will get all the virtual machines in my subscription that are running at this point, and it puts it in a nice little table in the web interface. Now, this is the main screen of an Azure Function app, and they have recently invested to make this look a lot like all the other screens that you are already used to in Azure. And here we have functions, and here I can get an overview of all the functions that are running in that app. I have only one here, which is a very basic HTTP trigger. And what I can do is I can see the code here that is running in that function app. And I can actually test the code if I want to. I think this one was created in the portal, so I could do that. I could change things here and start testing with it. What I want to do now is get the function URL and see if I can run that. And this is one of the things it's good to keep in mind when you're running function apps with Azure, with the consumption plan, is that it has a cold start. So the first time it is called, it takes a little while. That is why I moved back here, because this is still not loaded. The first time will always take a little while to start the AZ module and have that cold start in there. So for an HTTP request, that might be not be handy, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But for other kinds of management or scheduled tasks, it's not that big a deal. And here you see that I have the following VMs are running. My VM is actually called Always Running. And I have that VM because I have done this demo before, and I would forget to have a VM running at that time. So I would get an empty screen and think the script was broken. So this is the cheapest VM available within Azure, and it's always running. So the script that you see here is, it's basic PowerShell. Get Azure VM is mostly what it does, and the rest is all fancy output. So another nice thing that you can get from the portal here, we have to tap integration. And I can see those triggers and inputs and outputs. And I see I need to zoom out a bit so you get the nice overview. Yeah. Here you can see the trigger is an HTTP request. There's no other input in there. Then the function does its magic, and the output is also an HTTP request. So this can help you a bit with getting an understanding of what your function is actually doing. And I can manage these things as well here, as you can see here, and work with them. What I can also do here is monitoring it a bit. And here I can see the last run times I had and how long it took and stuff like that. And with the cold start, it's nice to know that if I refresh this now, it will be a lot faster. It's already done. So that's a cold start means it will run for about 10 minutes and then it will shut down. You'll have a cold start again. So that's what a basic function app looks like when you use it with PowerShell. And now I talked about the plans a little bit, and I want to consider the costs for that function app. You basically always start with a consumption plan, which means you pay per view. You pay for each use you have, but if you do not use the function app, you do not pay for it. Even with this plan, it's objectively cheap. It's really cheap. And the graph you see over here is an Azure Function app that I have running every day for a month. And I will admit that function app is not doing that much, but it runs every day. And the functions itself, I could think, cost me 1 cent. And the most expensive thing actually is that I have monitoring with alerts set on this function app because I want to know if it failed or not. And that's actually the most expensive thing for a month. And it's not, if you run bigger loads, it's not crazy to end up at €5 a month. It is really cheap, which makes it really easy to get started with it. But you do need to consider, for example, that cold start, which might not work for you if you have a web-based function app that needs to respond immediately. And at that time, you can choose a premium plan or an app service plan, where the app service plan is the cheaper option available. I think for about €25, you can also have something running. Another good thing that comes with that is that your runtime extends a bit. So instead of 10 minutes, you can go up to 30 minutes. But for getting started and for development environments and playing around, a consumption plan will absolutely work for you and will absolutely do enough. So let's talk about deployment. We're going to create a function app. What are our options to deploy a function app to Azure, as we're working with code now? And the first option you have is just deploy it through the portal. In my opinion, that's a great workflow that you get in the portal, and it can really help to get a good understanding of what's going on. I always use the portal when I'm working with new bindings, because it can help you get that basic understanding, get that visualization of it. And as it says here, you can use for quick and dirty deployments. I need a function app real quickly, do it through the portal. It's fine. You can create nice function apps there. I know it's a bit like, well, that's clicking and we wanted to code, but the portal is pretty nice. And it can really help you if you're developing small things or want to understand how that binding goes. So I would always recommend create your first function app through the portal. Now, once you get used to the bindings and the code that goes with that, and the function apps overall, I think it's good to move to Visual Studio Code. One fun thing about developing in Visual Studio Code is that you do not need an Azure subscription. Now you can ask what you want to do with an Azure function app if you do not have an Azure subscription. But for example, if you normally don't have permissions to just play around in an Azure subscription, well, here you can play around on your local machine and then see later if you want to deploy it. Debugging and testing is very quick in Visual Studio Code. There are options available to create a local environment and run them locally. And when you're done and you're happy, it is possible to deploy them directly to Azure. Now, to use this, you do need to do some stuff. And this is a bit of an old screenshot. So this is a screenshot from the Microsoft Docs. It is possible that those have changed now, but you do need to install some stuff. You only need to do that once, so it's not that bad, but it's something to keep in mind. And I think the experience is pretty cool, so it's really something that I want to show. And this is my Visual Studio Code environment. I have the PowerShell extension. I strongly recommend, if you're running a PowerShell in any way, to use that extension. It can really help you out. And here I have the Azure button. And here I have Azure Functions. And as you see, I'm not signed in to Azure at this point. So this is a bit to demonstrate that you do not need an Azure subscription. And here I have the option to create a new project. So let's do that. And it asks me in what folder I want to run. And it asks me what trigger I want to run. We walked through all these triggers, all those that were available. And here we have some options to select a trigger. And I'm just going to create a hello world function here. So I'll use that HTTP trigger. I can give it a name if I want to. I don't want to. I'll just use HTTP trigger. And I can choose the authorization level. Thing with authorization level, if you create an anonymous authorization level, then anyone that has the URL of your function app can call your function. And that doesn't need to be bad, but for example, for the last function that I showed you, that gives information about my subscription. So I do not want that available on the internet. Now, if that's the use case, I would go with function or admin, where function is means that there's a key added to the URL, and admin means there's one specific key added. For this use case, 1, this is a hello world function, and 2, it's only going to run locally, so I'm fine with anonymous. And now it starts collecting and creating the files for me. And it says it's finished. So if I look at the File Explorer now, I have a whole bunch of files that have been created. And oh, there we go. Took some time. This is the function itself. These are the files that work around it. Files where you can say what settings you want to use. If you want to use the AZ module, for example, you have a profile here which you can use like a local profile. It connects to an AZ account. But this is where the fun happens. This is the function itself. Here we have the function.json, and this is where you set the bindings. And it's a JSON file where, in this case, I have an HTTP trigger and an HTTP output binding. So every binding I can set in this file. And here I have the run file, and this is the script. This is the function. This is the magic. It generates some code for me, which is great. So because then I don't have to. And now let's see if I can run this locally. And I'll use func start. And it creates a great logo. And this creates logging on how my function app is actually starting at this point. And here I get an URL that I can use. And it's going to install AZ now, but let's take that URL. And I think I might be a bit early, but we'll see it in a second. Just crop this a little bit. Yep. So we can see what's going on. Oh, let me just, I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to tell it that I do not want the manage dependency. If I set this to false, it will not install the AZ module. And this means it will go a bit faster. Start. That's one thing to remember when you're running AZ module and you're running Azure Management. The startup time will be a bit slower. So now we have that URL again. The URL will always be the same. And I do an invoke REST method. And I put that URL here. And I see it running here. I see that it's being called. I get all these logging with it. And in this case, it's tells me an error, which is correct because this function is expecting a name. And let's add that name there. Call it Thursday. And now it's running again. And it said, hello, Thursday. So function is running completely locally. And if something goes wrong or if something unexpected happens, I can look over here and go through these logs to find out what actually happens. So that's when you're running locally. And after you're done, you are done. If you sign into Azure with your Visual Studio Code, you are able to deploy it directly to Azure. When you're developing on your own or when you're working with a dev environment, I think this is the best method available for deploying function apps. But once you start running production, I do think you want some kind of CI/CD out there. And mostly you're working with a team, and that's where you get with a deployment through Azure DevOps and now GitHub Actions. Here you can test your code before it's running and work with your team together and have a pull request, and I'll set it all up so you can get a cleaner deployment over there. And there are default tasks available in Azure DevOps and in GitHub Actions, which can help you with deploying the function app. So what I want to do now is go to showcase a use case, one of the functions app that I created that was a little bit more complicated. This was the goal that I had. I have an Azure subscription, which is for demo and test purposes, and I create a lot of resources there, and mostly I don't need them after I have used them, but I always forget to remove them, or something keeps standing there and it's costing me money. So I was looking for a function app that could clean up resources if I gave them a specific tag, and run that on a schedule every night. Challenge accepted. Now the thing is, this doesn't sound too complicated. It sounds like you could do this. You could do a trigger on a schedule, and that input, this is not completely how it would work because it's not input on a function app level, but this is just to get an overview. Within the function, I would say get AZ resources with a tag, and then I would remove the AZ resources and I'd be done. The thing is, if you remove resources with Azure PowerShell, you have to deal with dependencies. So, for example, if I have a virtual network and I try to remove it and there's still a network interface attached to the subnet somewhere, I will not be able to remove it. The thing is that Azure the PowerShell will first try it. And it will take a long time to find out I cannot remove that, and it will end up in an error. So that's not removed. So my goal isn't reached, and I had the function app timeout almost daily. So I had to move a bit differently and make it a bit more complicated. And to do that, I used the message queue. And before I can get into the function app, I want to explain a little bit about what a message queue does. Message queue is in the storage account, and the base that you get is an input queue, and you put a string in there, and that can be any string. And that string can be used to trigger a function, and the function can do something with that string. After the function is done, it will end in success or it will end in failure. If it ends in success, it removes that string from the input queue. If it ends in failure, it will add that string back to the input queue for a retry. And because the function is triggered by that input, it will start running again, and it will do this 5 times. If after 5 times it still has not succeeded, then the message will be sent to a poison queue. So the poison queue is an extra queue where you can get an overview of the things that went wrong. The great thing about a message queue is that it will run in parallel the message queue will not do all those messages one by one. It will start multiple functions. So the runtime gets a lot faster. So I thought this is something that I can use. So the base was still the same. The basics of what I wanted to reach. I have a schedule, and the schedule is my trigger, and this triggers a function that's called start function. What start function does is take control of, it takes an overview of my Azure subscription, and it gets all the resources that have that tag set. My tag is auto-delete is true, and it collects all the resources with that tag. Now, instead of trying to remove them itself, it puts all the resource IDs of these tags in a storage queue. That storage queue triggers a separate function called remove first resources. And this function starts to remove resources. And because it's through the queue, if it fails, the resource ID will be put back into the queue. But now I was working with those dependencies, and they would fail 5 times and then end up in the poison queue. So I needed to do something about that, and I did have it hard-coded here. I have some resources where I know they will fail because of dependencies, and these resources are put into a second queue. So they do not, the remove first resources does not try to remove them. It just puts them in a second queue and goes to a second function with remove second resources. And now this is pretty basic, but that function just has a start sleep at the start. So it doesn't start immediately, but it waits a bit, and then it tries to remove the resource. And it tries again for 5 times with that wait in between. And that way you have a pretty good shot at getting them all. But there is still the possibility for both of the function apps to create, of both of these functions can create a poison queue. So I was thinking, what about that? I need to know if this, if the app has failed, because those resources are costing me money. So I need to know if it has failed. And what I did is create very basic functions: get second potion, get first potion. I see they should be the other way around. But those functions are triggered by the poison queues. You can use the poison queue as a trigger as well. And when they are triggered, the only thing they do is create an output. They create an output which says, this resource ID has triggered the poison queue. And that output gets put into the log. And I have Azure Monitor set up with the log with Azure Alerts. So that way I always know if the function app went wrong in one way or another, and if my resources are not deleted. Now, I must say, since I have set up this environment with the testing that I did, I have not used the poison queues yet. The poison queues, and they don't even exist at this point, because it will make them when they need them. So it's, but if they do, then I'll get notified. So what does that look like in real life? Like I said, I have this function app running, and I cheated a bit with this demo and I recorded it. And the reason for that is that you saw that you can get logs from the Azure portal, but they're not always consistent. If you click a little bit too late or you accidentally click it away, there's a high risk of this demo going wrong. Let's say it like that. So that's why I recorded it in advance, but I will act like it's all live. And here you see my resource group with 2 storage accounts that I want to, well, one I want to delete and one I want to keep. And one has the tag and the other one does not. And if I go to the next screen here, I have my function app, and here I have the storage account that's attached to my function app. And this is where the storage queues will happen. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is trigger that function, so we do not have to wait too long. And here you see those functions that we just talked about. The timer function on the start function, all the others are triggered by a queue storage. And what I'm going to do is start the timer function. And here I have that code and test again, that we saw before, and I'm going to trigger this manually by using test run. And now I have run that function, and here it connects to application insights, and I'll get logging on what the function app is actually doing. And it's going to perform a cold start, so it's going to take a bit of time. In the meantime, we'll look at Storage Explorer within that storage account. And here I can get an overview of those queues, so I can give really good track of what is actually happening. And this is the first resource queue. The other one we will not use because the storage account does not work with dependencies. And here you see we get output from our function app. It has now connected to my subscription, and I can get an overview of the code that's running. This is the tag that I have set up. So the tag for me is auto-delete is true, and it will not work on any other auto-delete setting. And what I'm going to do now is keep track of that message queue, because they're going to get disappear there pretty quickly. Let's look at the storage account. Here you can see the tags, and here you can see that I have set the tag auto-delete to true and not for the other one. And this is what I mean a bit by this isn't always real time in my experience. It can take some time. This is why I keep refreshing that queue, because I do not want to miss it. And what you see here, it first checks the Azure subscription that it's using a managed identity. So the function app has its own managed identity and its own service principal, which is allowed to connect, which has permissions in my Azure subscription. And it basically gets all the resources, first the one with a tag and then the one without. And this thing is a tip. For any script, I always have a percentage count in scripts that remove stuff. If the percentage is too high, the script stops and says something seems to be wrong, you should check manually. Just to save yourself from a lot of headaches if it goes wrong. This percentage is crazy high, by the way, 80%. That's because this is my demo environment and it's mostly empty. But for a production environment, I've set it to 20 or 30%, where I know if this amount of resources would be deleted, something is wrong. There we go. It has found a resource that it can delete, and it had pushed it to the queue. And I can look here. And here I see the message text, which is just the resource ID of that resource that needs to be deleted, the storage account in this case. And what I can do now is this function is pretty much done, because there was only one resource. And with push output binding, it has pushed it to the job queue. And now let's look at remove first resource, because that should be triggered now and that should be running. And it's going to connect here, and I'm going to see here, and I see it's already gone. So the trigger has been done, and the first resource queue is now working with it. And here I can still catch a bit of output. Like I said, if you're a bit too late or a bit too early, you might miss it. And it's not always completely real time. But here it found the name of the resource was delete this one. And it says it's removing it. And it's pretty much remove AZ resource. So pretty basic to say it like that. And now we're going to see the portal sometimes is a bit late. So we're going to see if it's already done it. And the good thing is it will try this 5 times. So you have some options. And I have a resource group function in there as well, where it checks if the resource group is empty after a resource is deleted, then the resource group is deleted as well. I learned that the hard way after I had to manually delete about 20 resource groups. And these are some resource types which I know that have dependencies. So they will be, with push output binding, sent to the second job queue. And now my storage account is deleted and I do not have to worry about anymore, and the other storage account is kept in place. So it runs pretty quickly, and you need to remember that if I run this on like 30 resources, it will do them like 5 at a time. So it will run a lot quicker than if I had all separate functions that needed to do them all separately. So that's my example of a bit more complicated function app. And I have given a lot of information, and I want to give you some sources that you can use to get on with your own adventure. The first one is promoting myself shamelessly. On my blog, I have written a lot of blog posts about Azure Function Apps, all connected to PowerShell. And I have written some posts about deploying to the port to deploying through Azure DevOps. I also wrote function apps about specific I wrote blog posts about specific bindings that I did not find Microsoft documentation on yet, like the storage queue, the function app we just talked about. I have a complete blog post on that. So using the storage queue and using Cosmos databases. So I have blog posts on that. You can find them all in the serverless category. And what I've linked here is a Microsoft Docs page that can help you deploy through Visual Studio Code. They have some very good explanations step by step on how you can create that. The serverless library is a place where you can find examples. I learn by example. I love to see what other people have done and make it my own. Serverless library is community-based, and there's not that many PowerShell function app. I think like 14 or 15, but they're made by a few different people who are very good at it. So there are some nice functions there. You can deploy them directly to Azure or see the GitHub repositories. And one thing I want to mention is my repository for the 25 days of serverless. This is a challenge I did last year in December. And I wrote a function app for 25 days. Every day I wrote a function app. That's not completely true. I wrote some logic apps as well, but most of them were function apps. And I think I have touched every binding that is available for PowerShell function apps there, and some cognitive services. So I think there's a lot of examples there. Now, I wrote bad examples there. And the reason for that is that I had to write a function app for 25 days every day while working a full-time job and preparing for the holidays. So it's not the cleanest code. It's not always very clean, and this is what I would call YOLO scripting. It's not all production ready, to say it like that. And the reason I mentioned that is to encourage you to not start copy and pasting it and thinking it's fine. By the way, don't copy and paste stuff off the internet at all if you don't know what you're doing, what the script is doing. But it can help you out with all those bindings that are not that well documented yet. And I have been working on cleaning up, and I think I'm at like day 12. So after day 12, do be critical of what you're seeing. But maybe this can help you out with different bindings that are available. And I think that's it for me. I've promoted my blog enough. If you are working with functions and you come along questions in any way or something, you can always reach out to me on Twitter, and my handle is there. And thank you all for listening.
Cool. Thank you very much. We have 2 questions from the chat, so maybe you can answer them. The first one is, can we enable private links with Azure Functions to provide more protection and security data in transit?
I think private link is in preview at this point. I'm not sure if it's private preview or public preview, but I will admit I have not been able to get into that yet. But I know they are working on it.
Okay, thanks. And the other question is, how to manage the module dependencies. Is it something you need to do it yourself, or?
Manage the modules within the function app.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
I'm going to show that real quick while my screen is my screen still sharing? No, it's not.
No.
There we go.
Yeah, there we go.
Found if you scream that your screen is not sharing, it magically starts sharing again. Here you have the requirements file. And here you can set up every module that you want to use. So you can add other modules in here, everything that's in the PowerShell gallery. You can also say, I only want specific submodules from the AZ module, so you do not have to use them all. And that might make your load time a bit quicker. So this you can use for everything that's in the PowerShell gallery. And you are able to actually add your own modules to the function app. You can create a separate folder called modules and add your own function modules in there, if that's something you want.
Okay, I think that's a clear answer. Nice, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your session.
You're welcome.
And we planned a small break for now, but we are a bit behind schedule. So I think we will skip the break and directly continue with the next sessions. So Roland, take it away.
Okay, can you hear me?
I was muted as well. We can hear you now, but it's very softly.
Very soft. Okay, let me see if there's a way to turn up my audio. Still very soft?
It is a bit soft, but we are able to hear you. Maybe Hank can fix something on his end as well.
Okay, I tried disable audio processing. Not sure. Oh, I wonder if it's speaker. Wait.
How about now?
Ah, that's perfect. Yeah, that was
Hooray! Okay.
Oh, we're so glad you're here, John.
How do computers even work? Yeah, I'm happy to be here. This is great.
Yeah, when I heard you were going to do a session with us, I totally geeked out. And I'll try not to steal. We stole Barbara's intro. We'll try not to steal your intro, but you're the guy who helped me transition from developing web forms in the day a couple of years ago. From started creating MVC applications. You wrote the MVC Music Store demo and did some excellent sessions with Christopher Harrison on the Microsoft Virtual Academy. I sold those multiple times. So thank you for that. But that's way in the past. And you've had a couple of roles since then at Microsoft.
Yeah, that's true. So my latest is I am on the .NET community team, and I'm focused. I do a lot of things. You'll see me on like the .NET community stand-up, but I'm mostly focused on .NET on Mac. So you'll see I'll be doing my presentation today on Mac, and but I just love .NET development everywhere, and I think one of the kind of superpowers of a .NET developer is that you can be a .NET developer, and one day you're building microservices like I'll be showing today, and the next you're building a mobile app or a game or whatever. And that's really pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, it's very cool. You're going to introduce us to Project Thai?
Yeah, I am.
How do you come across this? How does this work at Microsoft? How are you involved with such a cool project?
Yeah, well, so the main way I heard about it was I'm involved with the .NET community stand-up, and as part of this, every Tuesday I'm putting on, I'm hosting a show that includes, just new things that they're building. And one thing that's cool with the .NET community stand-up is that it's just focused on, here's some things we're thinking about. So sometimes we'll see new experiments. Sometimes we'll see, just all kinds of, updates, or sometimes a demo off a laptop that might not even be working yet, that kind of thing. And so that's really sort of the idea there, is that we're able to show off, here's some new stuff we're looking at. And so as part of this, the team, we did a few shows where they were focused on, it was basically, I would call it the Teach John microservices shows, and they were showing me Kubernetes, and they were showing us, because in the real world, people are not just building simple file new project deploy, you're building more complex applications. And so as part of that, People are building microservices, like it or not, and they're having to learn how to do that, how to go about, actually building services and managing these complex services and stuff. So
Yeah, perfect. Well, very much
yeah.
looking forward to your session. So I think if you're ready, to take it away.
All right, let me share my screen, and I'm having a little trouble. I'm not a wonderful expert. Okay, let's share application window. I think I can share that. Cool. All right. This is slightly derpy, but I'm actually, let me see if I can show. If I show this, yeah, I think you'll see the actual use slideshow. There you go. That's the magic button. Okay. Yep. So here we go. I'm going to be talking about developing and deploying microservices with Project Ty. And last week, there was the .NET Conf focus on microservices. And so I'm showing some of the stuff that they showed there. I'm also using their wonderful slides because they're wonderful slides. And, so we're going to be talking about, we're going to see this from a slightly different side because I am more of a .NET developer that's learning about microservices and learning about Project Ty, and this is kind of what I've learned so far. So, first of all, here we go. Okay, so in just about any application, like I was saying, you don't just have one app. You very often have a web app and an API. And as I was starting with the VS for Mac team, we did a customer visit, and we were working with, pretty standard. It was a consultant shop that was working for a very large company, and they were building line of business applications. And these apps were ASP.NET Core, API backends, and a bunch of front ends. I think they were all using Vue. But this is very, very standard, is that, you'll very often have a web app and an API app. And then you run into problems because, well, first of all, let's talk about why we do that. Why have microservices and why split things out? Why not just run a big monolithic application? And one thing that they pointed out for them is it gave them the opportunity to ship faster, to avoid blockers on things. So they were able to say, okay, this team is focused on whatever, say the product API, and they can move as fast as they can. And then the web app front end can move as fast as they can. And as long as they're coordinating and managing their APIs well, you don't get into a spot where you say, well, we'd like to update our products, but we're waiting on this thing and we're waiting on this thing, right? So it really allowed them to be much more agile and to deploy a lot quicker and build better applications. But very simple thing that you run into is they were doing things like running Visual Studio for their API code and then running VS Code or a console to start up their front end. And then if you're running multiple APIs, sitting with them, they would start the app, they would start the API would fail because it wasn't connecting to another API it needed, right? So, this multi-project startup is kind of a pain. And there's ways around it. You can run batch files, you can set it up in Visual Studio. I'll show in Visual Studio Code where you can set up, your project's start, but it still is something you have to manage. Another problem you run into is service discovery. So if we've got multiple APIs, how do they all talk to each other? And so you end up with things like localhost port 5043, and then you have to, do you hard code it or do you set it in an environment variable? And then when you do, you've got to take care of deploying that to production and managing that. If your API connection changes or isn't working, it's just your application doesn't work. And that's just talking about, you'll see I've got two boxes on the right, just a web and an API, but that's not how any application in the real world works. You've got a database. You've got, maybe Redis or message queues or whatever. You've got dependencies. Lately, I've been working with this .NET Community stand-up, and we have several APIs we work with, but for instance, the YouTube API, and we have Azure Functions. And this is a very simple application, right? And so then we're dealing with managing those dependencies. So just getting started, not even talking about deploying, can take you a while. And you think about, number one, starting a new project up, and then also onboarding a new developer to your team. How long does it take for them to be productive? So that's sort of the background of, microservices are great, but they do bring some complications in. And so then you worry about, do I need to become an expert on Docker and Docker Compose and Kubernetes and all the 90,000 other things that come along with that, Helm and Istio and all just, like, what are we, Zipkin and, all the funny named things, right? So I mentioned Docker Compose, and Docker Compose does help with some of the things, but only some. And you still need to become somewhat of an expert on Docker Compose. So if you're a .NET developer, you need to learn how to do that. You need to learn how to set it up, and it adds some kind of front end load to getting started. So it is a solution, but it's maybe not the best solution. So what I'm going to be talking to you about today is Project Ty. And Project Ty is it's an experiment from the .NET team. So through November, the idea really is kind of move fast and break things. There's a lot of interest from the community. They're definitely planning to continue going, but the idea is that they really want people to understand that at this point, you shouldn't be taking heavy dependencies on Project Ty for production. That would be rather crazy, but you should be looking at, this is where we're going forward, and you should get involved. So I'm showing you right between now and November, it's considered experimental. You should expect breaking changes, but it's really awesome, and I'd like you to get excited about it now and learn about it. So some things Project Ty does. It does some really cool stuff, and I'll be showing you some demos with this, where using conventions and standard .NET project files and setup of a .NET application, it understands and kind of sets up your microservices stuff for you. So I can say .NET run, and I'm running my application, and it's kind of figured out, okay, here's how to orchestrate that and set that up. So right from the beginning, it gives me a very quick getting started approach. Then also, very commonly, when I create a project, now I need to track logs, and tracking logs in a distributed application is a pain. Tracking metrics, tracing, all those sorts of things, not easy to do. And so this is something where right out of the box, you can get that. You can also, directly within this, you can reference Docker dependencies also. So, and I'll show you that as well, where we can create a new project and we can just reference a Docker dependency and it'll pull it right in. And then straight from there, very quick deployment experience, including an interactive command line approach that shows you doing that. And also a cool hot reload sort of support. So all this stuff kind of built around how can we make it easier for a .NET developer to get started and run with stuff. One thing that I personally have found with this is, I've definitely found this is much simpler than reading a ton of documentation. There's still a bit to learn, but it's a lot, quicker to get started and be productive. What I do like about this too is that it is a layer on top of these existing things. It does not replace Docker, does not replace Kubernetes or all these other services. What it does do is make it easier to configure them, and so you can still reach down into your customization of Docker, Kubernetes, et cetera, and configure the heck out of it. But you don't have to do all that when you get started. So I like that kind of approach with any kind of developer thing. I like when things make it easy for me to get started, but I also don't like them to keep me from making customizations if I want to later. So let's look a little bit more at that. I'm going to be building up to a voting application. And this is an example of, kind of more complex application where we've got all kinds of front ends and back ends talking to each other. And this is what they showed during the .NET Conf presentation. What I want to do actually is start with a simpler case. So I want to start with, let's make sure, yep, still running. I'm going to start with Hello World in Project Ty. So I'm going to do it from the command line. I could absolutely do this from inside Visual Studio as well, but I'm just going to show super simple getting started. So hopefully, let me blow that up super big. Okay. And we're going to do, first of all, I'm going to, what do I have in this directory? I have a global JSON. And the reason I do that is because I want to build against .NET Core 3.1. I want to be able to deploy this later. And so I just want to be building on 3.1. I actually am running locally. Locally, I've got a bunch of crazy .NET 5 stuff installed. So I don't want those. Yeah, something like that. So anyhow, that's why I've got global JSON in. And just so you know, that's super simple to do.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
I'm still sharing the wrong thing, right? I need to share my screen. Thank you. Oops. Okay, so I will stop sharing. I will share out my entire screen. There we go. Wonderful. Okay, so that should work. And I think, yep, there we go. All right, so let's go in here. So what I was starting to say is I'm using global JSON to pin my .NET to .NET Core 3.1. And in this directory, all I've got is a microservices directory and it's empty. So nothing in there. Okay, so I'm going to do .NET new web app, and we'll put that in the front end directory. Okay, so this is literally a file new project web app. This is what you would get in Visual Studio if you did ASP.NET, new ASP.NET application. So now, right from the beginning, I could, well, let's pretend, let's go just one step further. Let's do like those two boxes and we'll do also .NET new web API, and we'll call that backend. And then the one other thing I'm going to do with this, and notice I'm not doing any Docker, I'm not writing any YAML at all. So I've got a front end and a back end. And then I'm going to do the very simple, create a new solution and add both of these to it. So, okay, so .NET new solution. And then we're going to add both of those things to it. So we'll say .NET solution add front end and back end. Beautiful. Now, I haven't actually done the work to make the two of them talk to each other, and that would be relatively straightforward. In the front end, I would point at the back end, etc. But let's pretend that I wrote that code. Hopefully, you believe that I could actually write that code. So now what we're going to do is we'll say tye run. So that's TYE run. That's it. I have done nothing else. Now, the one other thing that I have done is I've installed tye on this machine, which is a one-liner, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. So now tye is going and inspecting. Tye knows about .NET. It knows how to read a solution file. It knows how to find out, okay, these are the projects, understand what those projects are. You'll see these exciting words here, .NET or dashboard running. So that is neat. I'm already pretty happy about that. And it's building those two dependent projects. So now it shows a bunch of words on the screen. You'll show that it's already doing some stuff, and it's well, let's just go and look at that. Let's look at the 127, 8,000. So this is the dashboard it built for me. Interestingly enough, if you poke around, this is kind of fun. If you poke around in there, this is actually a Blazor application. So it's using it's hosting Blazor and it's serving up a standard Blazor app. So now I've got a front end and a back end, and I could go in here and I could say, here's my front end, and this is my standard ASP.NET app. And I could click here, and this is my web API backend. So an API doesn't have, I would have to actually browse to an API endpoint on it. But that's, so those are the things. Now, if I click on front end itself, it's actually going to tell me what I've got here, and it's already tracking metrics and stuff for me. So that's pretty cool. I also can go in and I can see the views, right? So this is, or excuse me, I can see the logs. So it's already also out of the thing, it's making it easy for me to track logs on these. And you'll see here, I tried to browse directly to there, and there's my failure on that. So that is super cool right from the beginning, that it's able to create a very simple front end view at this. So now let's look at a slightly more complex one, and we're going to go over to that voting application. So I'll go over, I think I've got this, and we'll do, nope, and I'll zoom this in. Always wonderful. So I have a really cool, console setup, but when you zoom, it goes just crazy. Okay, so now let's go, we want to look at voting. And so this is an application that's got here, if I did open, cool. So we'll take a look at this, and here's my voting application. And this has a front end. It's got, my front end is, web application, and it's got a vote, and I can vote. I think I've got this set up right now. Their sample showed cats and dogs, but I prefer to vote between tabs and spaces. So here we've got tabs and spaces, and we've got also a back-end worker, and then we also have a results view, and the results view is authenticated. So anyone can vote, but to actually see the results, you have to be authenticated. So there's three things hooked up here, and if we look over at this diagram, we've also got some other stuff included. We've got Redis, we've got Postgres, and then we have identity servers handling the authentication. And we can actually see all that if we go into our Thai YAML. So our Thai YAML is orchestrating that stuff together. So in the example I did, where I just did Thai run, it just showed, it just automatically inferred all that stuff. It read my solution file, and it just figured that out. Now, obviously, in this case, we've got to tell it about stuff like Postgres. We've got to tell it about our Redis. And so in this case, we're giving it the connection strings. So we're saying, vote, you know how to find vote. It's a CS proj, go run it. But for something else like Postgres, we actually have to give it some more information. We have to give it the connection information. Okay, so that is all we need to do to Thai enable that, with one exception. We're also, because we're doing the discovery on the front end, or we're handling the connection management, we also need to go in and we need to say, read the connection from configuration. So it's actually reading the stuff like here, configuration, get connection string, Redis. And it's actually getting that from, so we tell Thai, here's all your connection information. Thai populates that stuff into environment variables. And then when we run, that stuff is made available using standard .NET configuration. So a lot of talking. Let's see if this actually runs. So if I do Thai run. So what it's doing here, it's inspecting that Thai YAML, and it's using that, again, it goes through it understands the solution file, it understands how to read the different configuration, it sets a bunch of environment variables, it bootstraps that stuff, and hopefully, fingers crossed, it creates that dashboard, and the dashboard shows all the stuff running. So we'll give that just a second to spin up. So here's all the logs as it spins stuff up. And this, you could do this today, by the way. This is, I cloned the Thai repo. I went into the samples directory. I go to the voting folder and I say Thai run. As it's spinning up, let me show you the few tiny things I did here. If I go into Thai, this is the Thai repo, so it's .NET/Thai. And then if you go into documentation, and the first thing in the documentation is getting started. So step one, install Thai. you need .NET Core. You install Tye as a global tool, and that's it. So from then on out, you'll see the thing that I did before with front end, back end. It's all right here. And then I did Tye run, and Tye run just works. So this is like the world's quickest getting started experience. So now I've got the voting sample running, and you'll see here's my dashboard. So this is a standard .NET microservice application with multiple things going on. We told it about it through Tye.yaml, and then we read in all the connections using the standard configuration setting stuff, and here we go. So if I go in to this, and I put my vote in for tabs, do a few votes there. So that's that, right? And then if I go into, we can go and look at the docs or the logs, and you'll see it's got those logs showing all that stuff that happened. We can see our metrics here. So, it's configured all that stuff for us. It's also got Redis, right? So we can see, if we go into Redis, we can see our logs for our connection and our stuff going on with Redis as well. And again, all that we did here to set up Redis was tell it about it in our YAML file. And here we're going with Postgres. So that's kind of the going from, we did file new project, create a few little things, and Tye inferred all this stuff from it. Then we go into a more complicated sample, and here if we go use slide view, okay. So here we see this is this more, complex application, more real world, and we just saw that in action. Now a next step here is deploying, and as an example with a more complex application like this, I would be worried about deploying this sort of thing as a microservice, even with Docker and everything. There's a lot of orchestration going on. So here's what Tye is doing for us. First of all, it pulls this configuration in. So those configuration settings that I showed you in Tye.yaml, it can work with those as secrets in Kubernetes, which is really good. You don't want to be handling your application secrets, your passwords, your connection strings, all those things. You don't want those to be in simple raw files, right? You want those to be on your server. You want those to be using secret storage. So those are sent over to Kubernetes. Then all our different stuff. So our .NET applications need to be pulled into a Docker image, and it actually then at that point needs to be put into a container registry. And so a container registry, it could be something like, Docker Hub, or, it could be running my own container registry. And that's so then Kubernetes can connect to that. So then from the container registry, that can be deployed over into Kubernetes, and boom, that's exciting. So I'm actually going to show you a simple. Yep.
I'm interrupting yet again, but your screen was gone.
Oh no.
Stop
okay.
Sharing.
So let's see. I will stop sharing. How long did I miss?
I think about 20 seconds, 20 to 40.
Oh, okay. All right. And now? Good. Okay. How about now? Are we good?
Yeah, perfect.
Good. Okay. So now what I'd like to do is I'm going to go back to our very simple application that we built at the beginning that had front end and back end. Okay. So we had, okay. So here's my simple application, and it had front end, back end. Imagine as well that it has all these other things, has Docker, things with Postgres and all kinds of stuff. So let's look at what would be involved with, I do want to show deployment. Yeah, let's show deployment, but then after that, I'm going to show Zipkin because that's a fun thing. So we'll do Tye deploy interactive. I'm typing from memory, so we'll see how well that goes. Okay, so what it's doing again, it's inspecting, it's got my Tye YAML, and it's going in and it's taking a look at my application, and it's trying to infer a lot of stuff. And in order to do this, I actually have a few things running locally. So just when you see this, it's so that it's not all just completely magic. If you want to do this as well yourself, you can go in here, and there is in the Thai thing, there's a deployment tutorial, and you're going to want to look at this. So there's a few things to have set up. I'm running Minikube. So Minikube's very simple and easy to get set up. So that's what I'm running. And then I also have Docker Hub set. I have a container registry configured at Docker Hub. So those are my things that I've already done ahead of time. And you'll see, I think I've got one of these windows. I had Minikube running. We'll see if it's working. So I'll type in my name, because that's my Docker Hub. So the steps here again, if you'll remember all those fancy animations on the slide, is it's grabbing my information from my Thai YAML, it's pushing that stuff over to Docker Hub, and then it's going to deploy it to my Kubernetes cluster. And in this case, my Kubernetes is running on my local machine running Minikube. So Minikube is, and actually, yeah, okay. And I don't know if it'll even run, but this is the steps you would run through. So you'll see some neat things there, like validating secrets and stuff like that. So it should publish this out. Building, pushing. So there it's pushing the Docker images. So there we've gone through and done the deployment. Now, interestingly enough, the project team has said so far they've seen the big majority of the usage has been actually the development time. And while this is great that, you know, I can deploy my stuff out to Kubernetes, you know, to Docker, et cetera, don't fixate on that, because really what I feel, if I had not done this deployment, just the stuff that we already had with things like this cool dashboard and stuff is pretty cool, right? So that's, you know, don't think of it just as it's nice for deploying your stuff. And we can actually see if we go to, I think it's AKMS Thai demo, they've got this exact same thing running in a cluster. They're going with cats and dogs, and you can see this. So this is that thing that I just ran through and deploying to Kubernetes. This is deployed to an actual public endpoint in AKS. So that's kind of the example there of deployment. So again, you know, pretty smooth deployment experience, and not a whole bunch of configuration to set up in order to do that. So that's pretty neat. So another really cool thing is extended features. So there's a lot of support for things like Azure Functions, Dapper, et cetera. And the idea is, again, that Thai can know about and understand a lot of the common things that you would integrate with, and just be able to set that up for you. So the two things I want to show you is Azure Functions, and then I want to show you diagnostics with Zipkin. So let's see if I can get that done in time. Am I still sharing okay?
No, your screen's gone again. I think it was after the console window closed, or
how on earth? How does? Okay, so
yeah,
let's.
There's some technical.
Okay, that's fine. I host shows, and this stuff happens constantly to us too. It's wonderful. Okay, so yep, there I go. Okay. So the two things I want to show is the microservices deployment. So we'll do here, let's go, and let's zoom that up slightly. Okay. So we're going to take the microservices, and of course I'm showing with command line, and partly that's because it's so simple, and I kind of want to show you that, and it's also quick to navigate around. Some people get worried about, like, oh no, I have to type a bunch of commands, and you definitely can do this in the, you know, you can be working in VS Code, Visual Studio. I'm using Visual Studio for Mac as well. So let's go in here, and there's an Azure Functions area. So if I go CD, Azure Functions, and I'm going to go into CD front end. And this front end, back end is the exact same thing that I showed you before with this web API and a front end, and they're connecting to each other. I also have Azurite running. I hope I have Azurite running. Let's see. So you need Azurite running locally if you are going to be using Azure Functions. on a Mac because you need a storage backend. So that's all it is. Azurite is a cool open source tool that's out there and works well. So now I'll go tie. So if we look in here, there's not a lot of stuff. There is a tie. That's all we've got in our tie YAML. So there's front end and a back end. So then we'll go tie run. And this is connecting to our we have an Azure function, and the Azure function is just a super simple function that's handling the front end, back end communication stuff. What's neat with this is, again, in the dashboard, it just knows how to set this up. Oops. No, I don't want to go. So the problem there is that I still was linked into something from the previous there. So here it knows that it's of type function, right? And it's able to, like, if we go into the logs, these are the, if you've used Azure Functions, which I hope you have, this is showing all the standard output stuff from Azure Functions. Now, this is a very new feature, and so this is only supported right now for local development. It doesn't handle the deployment stuff, but it'd be pretty easy, to deploy and, just point at your Azure function. So that's pretty cool. I want to show you one more thing in demo land before we go and kind of wrap up. I think I have like 5 more minutes, right? Okay, so in here, here's our front end, back end. Actually, let's go over again to this. So if we go, open this up in Code Insiders, because why not? Just hop around everywhere. And I'm going to see if I can do this. I want to hook up this extensions Zipkin. And so what I'm doing with this, you'll see this is in the recipes, and they have some really cool recipes, and this is one here. So inside this, I'm just doing extensions name Zipkin. So let's try that. And I think I can put that, yes. Okay, extensions, and I do it like that. YAML still keeps throwing me sometimes. Name. And Zipkin is a cool thing that handles distributed tracing. So it makes it a lot easier to see what's going on. A problem that you run into in distributed applications is seeing what the heck went on and what failed, and if something's taking a while, what's taking all that time, or if something went wrong, what thing went wrong, which connection failed. So all I did there was I wrote in 2 lines. I just said extension Zipkin. So what's really cool here, you'll see in my console log here, is it's actually pulling in Zipkin as a Docker image. So it's pulling in Zipkin, it's configuring it because it just knows microservices on .NET. So I don't have to go in and say, okay, front end, you're logging here and you're doing this and you're doing that. And hopefully this is set up, although, yeah. There is one other thing that needs to happen, and I'm not sure if that's configured. Let's see if this works. Go here. So there's that. And then if I go into here, we'll go to our front end. So there's one other configuration step, and I'm not sure, oops, where you actually have to set the logging format. Even that, let's see if that works. So what it will do, I don't have the correct logging format set up, and I'm just kind of winging it here, but what you will see when you do this is this really cool distributed trace, where it actually connects the front end and the back end. And the one thing that I'm kind of rushing through, and I'm not going to show you now, but it's seriously just a couple lines of code, is you need to set the logging format. So you have to go into your startup, and you have to set this logging format, and that's what's required in order to set up distributed tracing. And that is an actual like W3C spec, which is really cool. So so those are kind of the steps of getting that set up. Let me see, actually, yeah. I'm not going to take you through that, but that's like that's really all that's required to set that up. So that's pretty cool, and that's included. There are a lot of other things that are included with that too as well. So there's like diagnostics, integration with Dapper. So, very, very quick and simple integration with Dapper. A new thing too is multi-repo scenarios. So being able to set it up. I've been showing you stuff that's all working in one directory, but you can actually reference another repo, and pull stuff in from there as well. So that is it. Do we have time for questions?
Well, we're a bit short on time, but
okay.
We have one question from Martijn, but he also said you already answered it in the session. But does Qt handle dependencies that are not managed in a solution file?
Yes. So, and that is a really cool thing, is that you can, and let me show very quickly here. There's if we go into the docs.
I think you have to reshare your screen again.
All right. Well, so in the docs, they show how to handle dependencies, and they have a whole kind of, it's a documented format that shows how to, how you can reference things. So it's just in your Thai YAML, you can link to Docker images, you can link to all kinds of other stuff, other repositories. You can link to different dependencies. So definitely that's sort of the idea, is that by convention, it's great at inspecting your solution, but it's also great at, you can go in and point it at whatever you'd like. So,
okay. Yeah. Perfect. Well, it was very cool. I really enjoyed your session. I'm definitely going to look into this because this is so awesome.
Great.
Well, you could share on the roadmap. Do you know anything insights on what they're adding as to functionality?
Yeah. Well, they just shipped 0.4, so that's kind of the newest stuff. Some things that they are adding is so my understanding is like Azure Functions. They're building more in with Azure Functions to actually be able to deploy it. I do think, let me see, they do have links over to the roadmap in here somewhere. They also have contributing guidelines, which is cool. And like it says here, they're posting about every 2 weeks. So the main thing, really, they're kind of working up to, and then also here they have the projects. So yeah, I don't know. This doesn't look super up to date there. So the main thing really, I think, is working towards the November kind of release. Yeah. One other thing I really want to kind of point people to is if it's running, it's not running. When I have this thing running, there's it's thing here where it says, tell us what you think. And that is a quick survey that you can fill out. And when you do that, that is really helpful to the team because that helps them focus on what they should be building and how you're using the application or using Thai, et cetera.
Yeah.
So
perfect.
Yeah. So, and then the place to kind of get started and learn everything about it is right here in Thai. And then if you scroll down, like you saw me kind of from scratch write a bunch of stuff. If you go into the documentation, and this is some of the best docs that I've seen a new project create. If you can go through these in maybe an hour, but you can do these first two in about 10 minutes. It's really pretty quick. So
the stuff you showed us really made me think I could do this as well. So that's usually a good sign.
Good. Yeah. Like I said, I'm a total newbie at microservices, and it makes me happy to work with something that just kind of works so quickly. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much. It really was great.
Great. Thank you.
I think we'll be working to our next session from Kushik.
Okay.
Again, a lot of thanks, and hope to see you again.
Okay. All right. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you. So we're already up to our last session for this evening. Hey, Kushik, welcome.
Yes.
Great to have you here.
Hi, Luke. Hi, Roland.
Hello.
How are you guys?
Are we pronouncing your name correctly? That's always the...
Kaushik. Yes.
Kaushik. Okay.
Kaushik.
Thank you so much.
Kaushik.
When I read your profile, it seemed you had the most awesome job ever at Capgemini because you help teams to develop and deliver applications on Azure. Is there something you can tell us about your current role, what you're working on?
Yes, that's indeed fantastic. For the last 3 years, I'm working at multiple cloud center of excellence, so CCCs or COEs, what they call, and working with insurance companies, manufacturing, and banking sectors. So quite amazing to see a lot of knowledge. And Azure Thursdays was one of my inputs to learn and apply at my job. So it's fantastic, and thanks for this opportunity.
That's very cool. Well, we're very glad you're here.
Yeah, thanks.
And you also already mentioned it, Cloud Centers of Excellence. And during your session, you're going to touch upon setting up Cloud Centers of Excellence. What is the one pitfall we should try to avoid? What can we tell our employers they should not do when setting up?
Overdo stuff.
Yeah, that's the main issue usually, that they're just trying to work everything out at once.
So what I have noticed that all the three is when you have a developer working, not administrators or data center mindset people, it's always useful to have that development knowledge where you can poke around and say, oh, we can do this already in .NET. Why can't I do it in Azure this way? And you link stuff, you orchestrate stuff. I come from integration background as well, and I try to link and mix up stuff. And okay, there you go. That's how you want to do it. So that's my approach. And looking at working with Microsoft colleagues mostly, and some very talented people, you see their approach towards Azure is also more on, let's tailor it, let's change it, let's make Microsoft redo the work on specific Azure components. That's their approach on all the Azure resources and services, what they provide. So that's what keeps me motivated doing this job.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
I think we're ready for your session, right? You're going to talk about building DevOps extensions?
Yes. So we will have a small session where we can build it, package it, publish it, and then push it to an organization, and then we use it. And that would be a simple one which we start, and then I will show you a small application which I just built, the extension which I built as well, which does similar approach, not covering all the patterns, but some of the patterns, which I want to showcase as well in the presentation. And I hope it is useful for application team or non-CCOEs as well to use it and develop it in their software life cycles.
Okay. Well, looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Take it away. Thank you.
All right. So let me share my screen. Share screen. This is the screen too. And share. Let me know if you guys already see the screen. So I am Kaushik Aravali. Thank you for this opportunity at Azure Thursday. I work for Capgemini Netherlands here, and I'm working for mostly clients who are working towards building Microsoft's cloud adoption framework on Azure. And when we are seeing these organizations which are building their CCOEs or cloud adoption framework, so let's go back a little bit. What is cloud adoption framework? When we go to Microsoft Docs in the architecture section, we see details about well-architected and cloud adoption framework. So to be in a very simple words, a cloud adoption framework is a collection of best practices and tools with some implementation guidelines for organizations to move faster towards their cloud adoption. So when we are looking at these businesses who are trying to move from on-premise data centers and have their workloads move to public cloud, we see that they have all the governance and the security principles which they would like to also extend it. And they want to have everything secure, of course, and that is understandable. And when they are working in the direction of extending those services or extending those models and principles, typically Azure resources out of box do not all sit in the same model. So if you look at financials, or if you look at the healthcare industry, this data is secure. They do not want to have any SMB port open on their VNet, but one of the Azure services, Azure File Share, just says 445, open it, and then you're there. Earlier, we had a discussion, should we have 445 port open or not? So small thing, but in an organization, it's quite a big impact, which could harm the governing principles or the security guidelines of it. So we have Azure services, a lot of Azure services, and we start looking into these Azure services. But when organization takes a look at these Azure services, as I said, they are going to tailor it. When I'm using the word tailoring it, they are going to change the way the behavior is going to remain the same, but the configuration around it is going to be updated with other Azure services and other nitty-gritty details. And that is where Azure DevOps plays a very crucial role in automating it and giving the same product, the tailored product, across the business or all the teams who are within the business. So in this presentation today, I'm going to talk about building Azure DevOps extension at Cloud Center of Excellence. So Cloud Center of Excellence is an operation model within Cloud Adoption Framework on Azure. So that's a basic start where I want to go with, and that's where the story also goes in my presentation. To begin with, I'll just give very briefly CCOE, the Cloud Center of Excellence functions, and how we are going to use Azure DevOps. We give the functional value for these functions, which it is trying to deliver. And then with Azure DevOps, we are going to build an extension, a very simple extension. We'll build it, package it, and we'll publish it and distribute it, share it across organization. And then there are a few design patterns which for use while using Azure DevOps extensions that I will go through. Pretty simple, but quite effective and commonly seen and implemented as well. So let's start and let's see what Cloud Center of Excellence is. So as I already said, Cloud Center of Excellence is an operation model on Cloud Adoption Framework. And one of the persons, Stephen Orban, he was one of the he coined this CCOE. He mentions that when a business has an application hosted in public cloud platform, they should start thinking about or should already have a team, a dedicated team, cross-functional, who is responsible for building a sustainable, resilient framework which supports the cloud operations. So all the cloud operations or cloud deployments onto cloud and monitoring, all that should be taken care of this cross-functional team. And the team is also responsible for advocating and giving good practices towards the business and IT organization part of the business, thereby transforming it, modernizing it to the next level, and make it easy for the DevOps teams to not bother about other components. And the CCOE keeps the complexity, solving the problems for them by meeting the business standards. So it's too much, but that's how CCOE is termed. And when Microsoft's Cloud Adoption Framework, where it comes into play, is it has all these functions which will meet these business IT organization transformation, and it says, I'm going to help you adopt to the cloud strategy. I'm going to help you govern it and make a running, resilient platform, cost-effective platform, and importantly, automate everything for you so that it's easy for teams to use it and have it implemented for their application deployments. And since these functions are quite large, one simple theme would not work. As I already said, it's a cross-functional team. There are multiple teams who are working on it, and they have objectives to deliver a complete package that meets these functions. So their main objective would end up as like a solution package, a solution building block for the DevOps teams. And a solution building block is something like a script, a common script, which is used across the teams. It can be a Terraform script, it can be a normal ARM template or a PowerShell script or API, in fact. And then you give it across the teams, give access to the teams, and they use the same script to deploy the infrastructure. And mainly using these solution packages being building blocks, Azure DevOps, the context of Azure DevOps here would be when the package is delivered to the DevOps teams are already using a tool like Jenkins or Octopus Deploy or something like Excel Deploy. When they are using it, if CCOE delivers a package which can be integrated in their DevOps environment, then using Azure DevOps already has this open and SDKs and toolkits that you can use to build extensions on top of it. And that's where you use Azure DevOps and target Azure as your landing zone. So that's the basic brief functionality of how CCOE, CDF, everything is integrated. And Azure DevOps comes into play that way. Before I go to the definitions of Azure DevOps, I will browse to Azure DevOps for a quick moment and show you in a brief overview. So I just went to Azure DevOps. This is a basic overview. I'm at the organization, Kaushik. I can create many organizations here. Azure DevOps is a cloud-hosted service, and I have multiple projects which I have access to. For this demo, I just created some samples. So every project has specific services in them. So these services, I could have only pipeline service in some cases, and boards, etc. But in this presentation and demo, we are going to look into pipeline services. I will go into pipeline service. A pipeline service has either has more of a build definitions and release definitions. So let me go to a release definition for sampling. And there is a release definition. I will create a new release definition. And if it shows up soon, and the release definition, I'm going to add this empty job for now. I'll show you what our demo would be and what we would be writing code for. And there's an agent where it's a server where a small component can be, a work component can be deployed, and our artifact can be made. So there are a lot of tasks. So tasks are the smallest granular pieces within a pipeline, which you can add and make it orchestrate your deployment process or your build process. And using these tasks, we are going to build a custom task here, which can be integrated within our release pipeline, and we will deploy it. So let's go back to the presentation again. And so we know the task is the smallest piece of work within the pipeline. And when we have more tasks, so a product in Azure service, each Azure service can be bundled into one task, or only one part of a service can also be bundled into a task. When you have hundreds of these tasks, you can wrap them together make a cover out of it and make the bag that would be an Azure a pipeline extension, Azure DevOps pipeline extension. So you install an extension, you use the tasks within your extension, and use the task within the release pipeline, release definition, to deploy or make an artifact out of it. So it will help the DevOps teams to improve their release pipelines, view or customizing it, so the experience of it would be modified. A little further, so now we have seen Azure DevOps extension, what it is, and what we are going to do. So what's the development of it? It's normal .NET development or any kind of a development, what we do. So we build it, test it, package it, and we publish it. So you deploy it, and then you give access to it, share it, and then you monitor the behavior of your application, same thing. And then finally, in this demo, we are going to do Azure resource deployment. Yeah? All right, so we already seen the task. Now we know the life cycle of it, and how does it look like? So the basic look and feel of an extension is quite simple. An extension, the top here. So this is an extension icon where it has two parts. One is a manifest file, which is a JSON file, which maps all the tasks which it has. And it has a front face icon, so a sticker on top of it. How should it be seen or given access to, or someone will see it when they are adding it to their pipeline. And then the task itself, a task is merely 2-3 components. For a very, very simple task, what we are looking at now, it's a task.json, which says a task.json is nothing more than a input file, which would be translated to the user interface by Azure DevOps when you use the SDKs or the PowerShell modules. And you have a backend script, so a TypeScript or a PowerShell script, which you can use to deploy the Azure resource or Azure service within Azure platform. And finally, you just have a sticker again, an icon, which says, okay, this is how my task is going to look, and the look and feel part of it in the pipeline. So that's there, and let's start some code. I will go to Visual Studio. I'll switch to Visual Studio now. Yeah, I think that's it. So what I have done is I created a sample folder for sake of time. It's empty folder with task 1 and icons in it, and then there are PS modules. PS modules are, remember I said something like Azure DevOps has extensibility parts where there are tools and SDKs. So PS modules are supporting parts that can be integrated within your task, where they will be understood and translated. So our new scripts are going to use this. And let's switch back to our presentation. I'll get back to the extension structure so that we'll create the same structure here. Go back here. Now, this is the main manifest part. I'm going to create a new file, VSS extension.json file. And I'll just paste the manifest. All right. All right, so there is a manifest file here, and I will create a, I will create another file, which is task.json, and I will create a new file, which is main.ps1. So our structure looks like this now. So we have our manifest, we have our task, we have our main, and we already have these stickers, and we have an additional one, which is the SDK. And now I already pasted the manifest code a little too soon, but let's look at it in some detail. So there's an ID, what you're going to give as a publisher. So you're going to create an extension, and you're going to publish it in a market and make it available for the users or organizations. You share it across the organization or within your organization, something like that. You have a version on top of your extension, and you give some metadata, the name, what kind of service it's going to use, icon, okay, all the metadata here. And then finally, we'll say, okay, this is one of the tasks which you should take care of. So the extension is going to bundle task 1, and you have a task where you have task.json file now. Now let's have some code there for task.json. So our task now is also there. It has an ID, similar. It's a GUID, which should be unique across your publisher profile. So I will get back to the publisher profile in a few minutes. Let's look at the task now. And task has some name, friendly name, all the metadata again, with the versions, etc. And you want this from here on, the inputs. So this is where we are trying to integrate our task with the Azure DevOps SDKs, or the extension in the backend. And now this task is aiming to deploy a storage account within a specific resource group. So the input would be a storage account. It's a type pick list. I'll come back to that one in a minute. A storage account, and storage account has, okay, give a name of a storage account, and then you are there. And remember I said about pick list here. I'll come back here. There is a database bindings. Data source bindings are making calls using the connection string that we have provided. So service connections are already available in Azure DevOps, which you link it to your Azure platform. So here in the beginning of the input, I added the service connection. So I'm saying this is the Azure RM service connection, which should be used for deploying my resource. So when the deployment is done, this service principal, the service connection linked to the service principal, would be doing the deployment for me. And the service connection is used in the extension to call all the resource groups and populate it for the user interface perspective. So it simplifies the view. So all what we are trying to do is we are trying to simplify a view and give it to the customer DevOps teams and handle the complexity in the backend of our scripts. Well, in this example, what I'm showing is quite simple, but next example, which I'll show, is a little more uphill than this small script. Let's go to the main PowerShell script. And we'll just say nothing too complicated here. We are just saying, okay, give me the start tracing as the extension, as the task is invoked, add dependencies, and then import the SDK, which I will be using within to get the context of Azure with the service connection that I have integrated. Now I have a resource group and a storage account, which I'm reading from the GUI, and then I'm just calling Azure PS PowerShell module to create a storage account. So our building process is done for this. Let's package it. So if I just have to package it, I just say, okay, TFS extension, old school way of packaging it, and then we have an extension that is ready in a minute. So, all right, so we have an extension, and we have this open folder, within a folder. Now let's get back to Azure DevOps portal, and I'll go to a marketplace. So I have a marketplace, which I'm a publisher with the name Kaushik Aravali right now. Sample which I created, and I'm going to add Azure DevOps to it, Azure DevOps extension that we have created just now, and we will drag drop it and upload it. All right, so it's being uploaded, and it's verifying the publisher ID. It's verifying if the task ID is unique. It does validations in the backend. All this is not visible yet, but that's the operations which it does. It's available in the market, but we haven't shared it across the organization. right now for this, I'm going to share it within my own organization. So my organization is Kaushik Aravali. And I will go back here and share it. All right, so it's all shared. I'm ready to use it within my pipeline. And how do I install it? So just giving or sharing it with an organization doesn't mean it's already available for the release pipeline, but it should be installed within the organization. So as you go to Azure DevOps, organization settings, and extensions, and you go to share, and there's something shared, which is today at 8:59. All right, let me install it, and its installation is also done. And installation process is not, since this is my own organization, I can install it and I can play around with it. But at CCOE, this is not all possible for a person to install it. Not a team to install it, but only specific TRA or elevated users can only use it to install within the organization. So it's all installed. Let's get back to the release pipeline that we started with, and let's refresh it. And within my task, I named it as storage, if you have seen the name of it. So I haven't even saved it. All right, let me do this again. But when we use this extension, here we can say storage, and there it is. There's a storage account which I created, and I can add it. And subscription, it says, okay, Azure DevOps subscription, the service connection, and resource groups. These are coming up from the service connection that I have selected, and then I can install it. And I can give a storage account, and a storage account would be deployed within my Azure platform. So that's a simple, quite straightforward Azure extension or task that can be done. Now this is not what we do at CCC, right? Everyone can do this. Now, little more complicated is I picked up Logic App as a sample that I worked up yesterday night to build it, and this is not too complicated, but straightforward as well. An extension with this one dedicated extension for Logic App with having multiple versions in it. I can have one or more versions as well. And I say, okay, for version v.0, I'm going to have scripts which does a creation of a Logic App, which does a removal of a Logic App. Along with it, I'm going to have templates, ARM templates, which does a lot of actions with meeting certain guidelines within a business. So if you want to lock it, you want to monitor it, you want to have it linked to something else. So all that complexity is handled in the backend. But what we see in the front end, so the task.json file, when we see it, I will come back to this one in the view. I have already installed it. So this is quite straightforward as well when we are looking at it. And then we have integrated pipelines where there is this new change here. The change automatically triggers. Remember, I did a TFS create extension, etc., and worked manually across, copying over. That is all, of course, not done. There are pipelines which are integrated with it. Any changes which are done are pushing the latest version of the extension into the marketplace. Let's go back here, and let's go back to the marketplace. And there's a Logic App which was deployed, the extension which was deployed here, and it had 20 versions working, and the pipeline does it automatically. All right, it's shared across multiple organizations. Share. So you see they are shared across multiple organizations now, and I can use it within my pipeline. So I'll go to the release pipeline. Yeah, delete this. logic app edit. All right, so there's a logic app extension. What it does is it takes the resource group where we want to host the logic app. Quite important is a naming convention. There's always a big debate going on with what are the standard naming conventions which go across the organization. So the CCOE has wikis and standard guidelines which are also shared across the business. So teams are aware of what kind of naming convention would be generated for the Azure resource which they have created. It can be a drop-down which says, okay, I want specific kind of naming convention. So in this case, I said, okay, project, workflow name, location, etc. And then I give a suffix. So this would be only part of what I'm going to deploy. And then I say this is a key vault where my logic app is going to read the values from. And you can also see I embedded the definition of my logic app. A definition of a logic app is a workflow. What logic app is a workflow, you can also draw it in Visual Studio. You can extract the definition from Visual Studio, and you can create parameters out of it and have it deployed in one go. This becomes CI/CD for your logic app. And once I deploy it, I'm getting the details, the definition from my Git, and I deploy the logic app. So I go back here. Okay, leave this. Okay, I think this one should work. I created a logic app and created. So I set the target of logic app to be my my resource group here, past resource group, past workloads, and the logic app should end up here. So now let's get back to our presentation again. All right, so we have looked at the code, we have looked at extension, and then we are seeing more details of that extension. And coming to the guidelines of it. So the patterns, what we see more frequently are when working with the pipeline, when working with the extension, you might have already seen the code duplication with PS Code, or when there are more tasks, custom tasks which are built, we are going to copy the code and make our Git way too heavy than required. So we don't want such kind of a task where you have PS modules copied over hundreds of times. The common functionalities can be skipped over, and then we can end up with a pattern, something like this is a development environment where people are working on. So we have common modules which we save to Git, and with an extension, with a pipeline, we're going to create a NuGet package of that PS module, make an artifact out of it. So any common PowerShell modules are in there, versioned, and any new team coming over, when boarded within Azure DevOps, within the CCOE, takes over the lightweight part of building an extension, reuse the components within the Azure DevOps artifacts, and they embed it within the pipeline, and then they release their extension to public. So quite straightforward as well. But this pattern minimizes the workload and maintains the code quality, and always reusable parts of code are spread across the organization of at least CCOE in most cases. So that's the first pattern what we see. The second pattern is about how do we secure. So we have created our extension, we have given our extension, we are going to give our extension to the DevOps teams. Azure services are a way to some of the Azure services, let me put it that way, some of the Azure services have certain aspects where the governance models will not allow them to be productized to the DevOps teams and use it in their pipelines. For example, a virtual network or an NSG change or Azure Databricks implementation. Or if you look at Azure AD parts, where if you have an application which you're trying to link it with Azure Active Directory, you do not want to give Azure DevOps enough rights to make ownership of applications. That will actually ruin most of the components, the core components that COE guards. And in order to secure that, there are principles how you approach it. And one of the patterns, what you typically see at COE is you have Azure AD. So this is structure what you always see, this Azure AD with Azure DevOps and Azure Platform. You have all your COE and DevOps teams within your Azure AD. And COE is delivering an Azure extension, and that is being used by the DevOps teams that we already know. And along with the extension, they integrate it with the API landing in Azure, a secure API, to which the extension always works with, such that it checks the validation of the user, checks the incoming request, checks if there is a deviation from what is expected, etc. So when a DevOps team invokes a release, it triggers the extension, and the extension invokes API, HTTP endpoint, and after successful validation, then a resource is deployed within the customer resource group or a subscription. And it is not always that the sub-service principle of the DevOps team also has access to deploy specific connectivity options, but they go to a higher service principle, which has more elevated rights to perform a virtual network deployment or AKS deployment or service principle rights, permissions, etc. So this is also quite often what you see as well. And this secures the usage of your extension, and you can stop another team from implementing or making changes to a certain other team who are deploying infrastructure. So that's the second one. And feedback loop. Okay, so we have all the Azure services which we have deployed in Azure with these extensions. The DevOps teams are using these extensions, and they are quite vastly implemented and integrated in the pipelines. When the telemetry or when the logs are seen from the extension, from the task, when the release pipeline runs, it is important for the COE teams to the product teams who have built the extension to understand what is the behavior of an extension. Was there a deviation, or was something going wrong, or was something has something been failing frequently? So the proactive monitoring, rather than looking up the next day morning with all the tickets on their board, we can implement feedback loop within the extension by application insights. So the same structure what you see before, COE with all the DevOps teams delivering an extension. Now the extension is integrated with application insights. So Azure COE team also deploys app insights, and the extension keeps sending the telemetry data, the exceptions, the events, and the workflows which are there, which are done within the pipeline, done by the DevOps team. And it also does the deployment finally in the resource group, and it sends out enough information back to the application insights. And thereby, if there is a deviation, there is a process which reads the logs of application insights and ends up as a item on the DevOps team board that there is a deviation or there is a failure. There has been multiple failures with specific extension of so-and-so version for an organization. So you can also see that when this extension is deployed in another organization, rather than the organization which they have been using, you can also monitor if it was accidentally or there was some mishap which happened that installed it in another organization. You can see the organization details, etc. So that's also a useful pattern what you can see. The next one is okay. Now we are in the CCOE issues, and we are looking at extensions and working with infra as code, etc. And now we are in the application development team, right? So when I'm an application.NET developer writing my API app or a web app, and I want to deploy it, and CCOE is provisioning my configuration. So the configuration is the infrastructure what they are providing me, and I want to make sure that it is always intact and it is not messed up in any part of my release cycles as my team grows and matures further. So the main part is configuration drift, which I'm trying to address here. So what we can see is a pattern where we have something like a sidecar pattern, what you see in normal development, where okay, you monitor your application and you monitor your configuration apart from your application, and then you redeploy. That's the idea behind it. So coming back to the same picture, I'll come back to the sidecar pattern in a minute. So the same picture again. Now we are a DevOps team, not a CCOE anymore, but a normal application development team, multi-regional, and performing. It's quite mature, and they are performing application deployments in very frequent cycles. So they have application pipelines and they have an infra pipeline. And the application pipeline is performing their normal actions. Their release pipeline has been deployed multiple times. And aside with sidecar pattern, you have another another resource group with a logic app. You can also have a function which monitors a specific resource configuration. So for example, if I want to check the history of a specific resource, for example, a virtual network or an AKS cluster, I can check it with the Azure Resource Graph, change history API specifically, where you can see the last half an hour, what was the change, what was the last change, last 5 changes which have been done. If there is a deviation in that configuration, then you can invoke the logic app or a function app to trigger the infra pipeline from Azure and reinstate the configuration, making sure that the application is still running on a governed, secure infrastructure that is provisioned by a CCOE or from the business. So that's the final pattern. And here are some references. And let's go back and check the logic app that we have deployed. So here we should see logic app being deployed, fine. And I'll go back to the resource group. Okay. All right. So there's a logic app, pass workload workflow. All right. This is also deployed. And let's look deeper in it. So this is a logic app with a naming convention. I haven't given this naming convention. I only gave workflow as a sample in my release task. So if I go to release, edit the release, and check it, that is the name of it, workflow, which I have given, but it followed the naming convention, so and so. Now we go back to our logic app. So it is deployed. What else do we see here? So we see it is enabled with identity. So by default, out of box, you do not have logic app with enabled MSI, but now you have enabled the MSI. You have logged your logic app, making sure that it is not deletable. And what else have we done? We have enabled diagnostic settings of logic app. So it is sending data to my OMS workspace, which is living in another resource group, or it could be another subscription as well, but this can be also done. And finally, we go back to the definition of the logic app that we have deployed. We edit it, and should show up with the workflow that we have defined in there. So there it is. So this logic app is trying to monitor the change history of a storage account, for example. And then we have a working logic app with a disabled state. So I haven't enabled it, so I have disabled it as well, so that anytime I can come to the portal or I can do another task to enable it. So that way we are seeing it. Now this logic app deployment is done. Now let's look at another thing about monitoring what has happened with our logic app deployment from the release pipeline. So I have monitoring DevOps extension, the application insights, that has been monitoring how things are going with my extension task. And I go here to events, and it should have had an event which said, okay, it is installed for so-and-so organization or invoked by an organization. Okay. All right, so there it is. So there was something here. More insights, and I'm looking at, okay, so past workflow LA has been deployed, or it could have also said failed to remove a logic app as an example. So you can have an exception as well, and you can filter it, and you can have a process which monitors your application insights and sends out the data or a dashboard Azure DevOps work item on your Scrum board. So that way you're pretty much using or customizing your infrastructure and making it easy for the DevOps teams, and hiding the complexity with all the logs, monitoring, etc. on your side. So let's get back to our presentation, and I think that is it. You can go to Azure Pipelines. There is a GitHub link where you can see sample or the open source task which Microsoft has created. And you can also build your own based upon that one. That's sometimes easy to start with. And I also created a blog post on how do we work and how do we make a CI/CD for your extension using a template and a YAML. You can see the YAML file as well. And it should work as you download it and clone the repo. Okay, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, please let me know. All right, Luke, Roland, are you there?
Hey. Thanks for the session. Yeah, we do have some questions.
Yes.
The first one is, how are you guys handling rollback and canary deployments for core resources like network, storage, etc.?
When we do the deployments, you guys handle rollback and canary. Okay, so it is quite difficult to answer the rollback process, and we give the extension as a front face, and the backend versions keep updating on the task. So that would be updated, and the user would not see it. And canary deployments are not possible out of the box. What we do is we identify preview customers, and we give handle to the preview customers as a starting point, and then they go forward from there. Based upon the feedback, we continuously improve the product.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
And on the chat, we had another question. This looks like a lot of work for a CCOA. How do you prevent the CCOA from becoming an organizational bottleneck?
It is quite often that application teams want to deploy their applications really faster than what CCOA provides. That is quite often what we see. And if the DevOps teams are capable enough of standardizing the extension, so that should be reusable across the organization. That's the main idea of it. So if a DevOps team A has a Kubernetes cluster which is linking to which is hosted in North Europe, and the governing guideline says it is only permitted to do it in West Europe, then you should follow the guidelines and you should be able to tailor it according to the organization, because at the end of the day, you are working for the organization, but you're not working as an island for yourself. So either CCOE becomes a bottleneck, or you will have to tailor it in such a way that it can be used across the organization. I hope that can answer.
Okay, thanks. Well, then that's it for this evening.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much. Yeah.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
It was nice to have you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you.
All right.
This is the end of the evening. Thank you all for watching. Thanks to the speakers. Big thanks to our sponsors. And hopefully you will all be watching in September again. It's September the 3rd, I guess. Am I right, Roland?
Sure. Yeah, very correct.
Nice. For now, hope you'll enjoy the rest of the evening, and see you next time.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.